Bonjour mes amis and welcome to Oh God What Now, the show that would happily raise your taxes so that we could remain free to listen to, preferably in more than one language. I'm Seth Tevil. On today's show, Britain is, financially speaking, in what we would technically call a hole. So how do we get out of it? Following on from the sporadic reaction to last week's budget, we want to discuss a much broader plan for the economy, a lasting plan, one that's not simply focused on the short term or to win political favour, and that might set the nation on a better course and not just being designed to keep backbenchers and the Daily Mail begrudgingly happy for another couple of weeks. And fortunately, one of our panellists happens to be the co-author of just such a plan. But first, joining me to discuss this is Rachel Cunliffe, Associate Political Editor at The New Statesman and Speaker of Ancient Greek.
Trying to say that I am not the panellist who has the plan. I want to make that very clear up front.
I usually do that disclaimer myself, but on any subject ever. I understand that this week you've been looking at a Python-esque combination of the budget and penguins.
I'm wearing my penguin jumper for those of you who are watching the YouTube. So I've been looking at the budget because it was kind of hard to avoid this week. Many of us journalists tried really hard, but it was it got everywhere. But the penguin story is something that I just want to highlight because it's one of those political stories that I feel like really resonates. 75 MPs have signed a letter protesting the treatment of the penguins in the London Aquarium, which is, you can see it from Parliament, but you can't see it because it's a windowless basement. And there are 15 penguins that are stuck there. And I went and had a look at them and had a chat with some of the MPs who are trying to free them. And it's amusing on kind of Britain's very good record on animal rights, and yet we have these penguins in the shadow of Parliament. So check it out if you care about penguins.
And I'm not sure.
You're trying to segue into the budget, aren't you? It's impossible.
I was trying to segue into the budget. It's not accounted for penguins, I assume.
It hasn't. Actually, I feel like freeing the penguins is one of those things that the government might want to do because it's free. It's sort of a good news story that doesn't actually cost anything. No, I can't get a segue to penguins into the budget. All I can say about the budget is most of what we thought was going to be in there was in there. Most of the big challenges that we thought were going to be skirted were skirted. And we're just going to wait and limp on and see which bits of it unravel first.
Joy, oh joy. And our other guest today is Associate Fellow at the Centre for European Reform, John Springford, who has written an essay with Andrew Sissons, Getting Britain Out of the Hole, a Plan for the Economy. And he even speaks French. Bonjour, John, and welcome to the show.
Bonjour. Thanks very much for having me.
You've previously written analyses of Brexit that could be quite doom and gloom. So how did it feel to write something a little more upbeat about what we can constructively do?
Well, it was nice to write something upbeat. I mean, I have to say the plan, we got quite a lot of flack for essentially doing a centrist dad plan, which I don't think is entirely fair. We thought it was quite radical, really. And the thing is that growth is like super difficult, politically difficult. Maybe we can get onto that a bit. So it was nice to write a plan that we think would work. The question is just whether the politicians will ever deliver something like this.
Yeah, and that's something I think we'll get on to. On the wider question around linking to politicians, what has it been like being an economist in budget week?
Well, it's been quite fun. I mean, the really fun bit was the leak of all of the documents, which
unless you're the Treasury.
That was really fun. I concur. That was the highlight of budget week.
Yeah, I mean, added to the gaiety of the nation. I mean, I felt sorry for whoever it was at the OBR that messed up. But the wonks really like reading the documents. They don't want to hear the speech. So it was nice for us to have it beforehand so that we could largely ignore what Rachel Reeves said.
Wise words of wisdom.
Somehow suspect Rachel Reeves isn't our most fervent admirer. Before we start, a reminder about the special festive offer from our friends here at Podmasters. As you know, we owe a huge debt of gratitude to our faithful Patreon backers who've kept us going for nearly 9 years now. And as a mark of thanks, and perhaps to entice a few new supporters, we are offering 20% off a year's backing for Oh God What Now. It works on all tiers, whether you're renewing your support, upgrading, or joining us as a new backer. You'll be helping to keep us in good shape for the battles of 2026, and we will be eternally grateful to you. That's 20% off a year's backing. Just follow the link in the show notes or search Oh God What Now Patreon to find out more. The Labour Party has a long history of economic planning to try and turn around the fundamentals of the British economy. Clement Attlee's post-war plan, Harold Wilson tried to break up the Treasury in two with a Department of Economic Affairs to do long-term economic planning. But that may all seem a thing of the distant past. Tony Blair's governments tried to go with the post-Thatcherite consensus, while still steering some of Britain's economic needs around skills. This week, we're looking at where Labour is taking us today. We hear plenty about individual measures, but not so much about the big picture. John, you said in your recent essay that Britain hasn't based its economic strategy on the things it is good at. So let's start with a bit of positivity. What are we good at?
Well, we're really good at, tradable services, which is incredibly boring wonk speak for essentially finance, accounting, law, and some things like in culture. Like we're very good at media and advertising, and also increasingly we've become a little bit of a centre for tech. Obviously, nothing like Silicon Valley, but we've been doing reasonably well on that. And then we've got some real niches in manufacturing. I mean, aerospace and luxury cars like Jaguar Land Rover and so forth. So they're kind of Britain's real strengths.
But some of those are actually in crisis. I mean, things like the creative arts. There's a real shortage of funding at the moment and cutbacks all round.
Well, exactly. So there was some kind of thinking about why we haven't really based our economic strategy on our strengths. There's some kind of long-term things, and then there's some short-term things. And the long-term things are, one of the really important things for kind of advanced knowledge work that goes into things like the arts, but also finance and professional services and so forth, is having cities that really work. And our cities outside London really don't work very well for those kinds of activities. And then the near-term thing is that Brexit has really hurt some of the niches in manufacturing that we do have quite badly. And the thing about those is they tend to be much more spread out around the country. They tend to be in smaller cities and towns. And so one of the big problems that Britain is facing is that for all of the talk of levelling up under Boris Johnson, we've had a strategy which makes levelling up much harder. And then the very last thing that we've sort of piled onto the pain are some of the problems in universities, which are in a lot of financial trouble. And they're really, really important for a lot of these smaller cities. And they're real economic anchors. There's loads of people that are employed there. And if you have universities in financial crisis, then you damage those cities' economies quite seriously. So I think we've kind of got some long-term things and some short-term things, and we have to tackle both at once.
Can I come back on just one thing you mentioned there, which is cities outside of London not working? I mean, what do you mean by that? Because we're talking as simple as transport infrastructure or something more fundamental?
Well, there's definitely something quite fundamental. One of the really big things about economic geography is that when a city grows up around an industry, then it tends to be made for that industry. And turning it around and making it be made for another type of industry takes a huge amount of work and effort, and we really haven't put that effort in. So if you think about the north of England, there's lots and lots of cities and towns that are quite spread out, because each of them had their kind of specialism. And the problem with that is that with services, what you want to do is ram together as many, high-skilled people together in a place as you possibly can. And if you can't do that by building lots of skyscrapers like Manhattan, then the other way to do it is to link them up much better with transport, so that you expand the size essentially of the city. And neither of those things have been done. So that's really the fundamental reason why our cities outside London struggle.
What would you say to a cynic who confronts us all and says this is just a conversation amongst a bunch of Southerners who didn't know what they're talking about?
Well, I mean, it's certainly true that I'm a Southerner, but I come from a relatively poor bit of the countryside in Dorset. And one of the things about North Dorset was that it's kind of a centre for dairy farming, but also it was a real centre for cheese manufacturing as well. And one of the problems that it has is that a lot of the cheese manufacturing has kind of disappeared. And so, there's also problems not only in kind of second cities like Manchester and Birmingham, but there are problems outside London and the southeast, in the south too, in terms of providing kind of high productivity industries and jobs for people.
And I suppose that's the wider point about the cyclical nature of the economy, that areas boom, areas go through busts. There's no iron law saying they have to come back, but they can do. It involves a lot of creativity.
Yeah, that's right. And it also requires quite a lot of policy effort. And it is genuinely very difficult to turn around a region that's struggling. But you won't do it really just by a kind of hands off, Whitehall knows best kind of approach.
You write about productivity, saying that productivity growth has slowed down in all advanced economies since the 2008 financial crisis, but it has been most abrupt in the UK. Why is that?
Well, a few reasons. One is that we had a very kind of financial services heavy economy. Lots of our exports in the run up to the global financial crisis came from finance. And then when the crisis tore a hole in the sector, then that really hit us. But then the other reason is that the financial crisis was a real problem for a lot of businesses to be able to get capital because the banking system was knackered, basically. And that meant that they didn't invest. And also consumers who might buy their products, they were all quite heavily indebted too. So they were less willing to buy stuff. And so you saw this really big hit compared to other advanced economies in the UK to productivity as a result of those issues.
And are we uncompetitive in other ways?
Yeah, we're uncompetitive in some ways, certainly. I mean, the one of the really big issues in some cities, in particular, is that there are a lot of people who don't really have decent education. So, for example, Glasgow's got the lowest share of people who have got post-16 education of any of the major cities in the UK, and that's something that kind of holds it back, because one of the things about being a very kind of services dominated economy
Mm.
is that if you're a city, then you want to get as many kind of graduates and people who've got decent skills and education to be in your city. And because our economy has become so unbalanced, with London and the Southeast being so dominant, then a lot of graduates who are at universities, good universities in second cities and third cities, move down to London to try and do better. That's changed a little bit in recent years, and Manchester and Bristol to a certain extent, and also Birmingham a bit, have been doing a lot better in attracting these kinds of people. But it's been a real problem for some other cities in the UK to try and retain the talent that they create.
So when it comes to growth, do you think the government has missed the mark so far?
Yeah, I don't think the government has really lived up to its mission, its growth mission. They said that growth was going to be the number one priority, but kind of politics and economics have got in the way a bit. So, I mean, thinking about the budget, and last year's budget as well, they had kind of little choice but to raise taxes, because the public sector is in such a state, um, and the idea of having more spending cuts was really just for the birds. Not just because of backbench MPs, but also just because the state of the public sector is in such a bad way. And so, if you're going to raise taxes, then you want to do it in a way which is going to cause the least amount of damage to households and businesses, and that's not really what they've done. They've kind of gone for the easiest tax rises that they can make politically, while kind of claiming that they're sticking to their manifesto, which is not really true.
Yeah, and effectively trying to raise as much revenue as they could do by directly raising income tax, which is the one thing they are not going to do.
Yes, and there are other ways of improving the tax system, like making the taxation of property much more rational, because at the moment it's pretty insane. The One of the 9 residences in Buckingham Palace pays less council tax than a top band house in Hull, which is absolutely crazy. And also there were lots of other things about capital gains taxes and VAT that they could do to just make the whole system much more coherent and efficient. And that would mean that they would be able to raise more money without, damaging the economy so much.
I want to return to tax in a bit, but you've written about the Balmoral effect. What's that, and why is it hurting Britain?
So William Balmoral was a New York University professor, and he said that he called this a kind of a disease, which is that really productive companies tend to push up the wages of less productive companies.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that over time, the less productive companies get bigger and bigger and bigger. And we kind of flip it on its head, really. And we think that the Balmoral effect is a real benefit, because it's kind of the way that a kind of vanguard of companies, which are super productive, which trade internationally, which do lots of investing, they tend to raise the living standards of people who are working in relatively less productive ways. And so one of the problems that Britain's had, because the global financial crisis, then Brexit, really blew a hole through into our economic model. One of the big problems is that those kind of vanguard of companies that really raise loads and loads of money, which then spreads out to the rest of the economy, they're really struggling too.
Rachel, you recently chaired a panel which you summarised in a piece headlined "Would Anyone Work If They Didn't Have to?" What do you think is at the root of our productivity problem as a nation?
Well, that panel was specifically about trying to encourage, quote unquote, older workers, which I think is a terrible term for this group, but sort of the over 55s, how to keep them in work, because early retirement and the fact that we're all living longer, we're not necessarily working longer, is costing, I think, 31 billion a year. Yeah. So one of the points that was made was that people who can afford to retire early will do so unless their jobs are meaningful in some way. They feel like they're getting value out of them, if they're worth it in some way. And there were a lot of ideas there about things like flexible working, like most people don't want to do the rush hour commute, things like flexible hours to fit around other interests or other responsibilities, things like reskilling. That I listened to this panel and I went, this is all very true for over 55s. This is also true for everyone. And if we think about skills as being one of the core things that's holding us back, we have this weird system where you kind of got to decide at 21 what the skills are, or 18 what the skills are that you want to learn over the next 3 years that are going to prepare you for the next 4 decades of work. Now, the job of that Fatima's next job could be in cyber advert with the ballet dancer. That was a very crass advert that really, I think, sent quite an insulting message to the arts and the creative industries, particularly because we're really good at creative industries. But I think the core message of that, which is we should be enabling people and encouraging people to reskill at every point in their life and supporting them in doing that, and possibly, to pick up on what John said, supporting them in moving to parts of the country where they can be more productive. That's a core bit of rethinking we have to do about the workforce and the way work works if we want to increase productivity. I'm not sure that's the main reason we're unproductive as a nation. My kind of core gripe with governments over the last, I'm going to say 2 decades, maybe it went on before that, is just a focus on the short term. Sure. And a lack of investment in infrastructure, a lack of investment in skills, a lack of courage, I would say, to take long-term decisions that won't give you a political win within the parliament. And obviously you want something nice to offer the electorate. But we have this habit of political survival over any kind of long-term thinking. I think everyone agrees that we need nuclear reactors and high-speed rail and better roads and more houses and clean energy tech and all the rest of it. But they are always the very first thing to be cut whenever there's a more pressing day-to-day spending demand. So that balance of the long-term and short-term, I think, has gone very badly wrong.
And that does seem to be the point, that actually, that although there's an agreement in theory as to what we need to do, like there's not been a government in my lifetime that hasn't said it is pro-education, pro-skills, but we do change around a lot within that. We go from saying, well, we need more higher education, we need more further education, we need to expand the sector, we need to focus on quality in the sector. And that makes for very little stability within that.
There's little stability. There's also the short-termism, I think, comes to what we do in tax and spend as well. And I'm going to talk about that a bit more later. But to take one example from the budget that I think has been kind of missed in the coverage, although I have written about it, is if you look at young graduates, specifically on post-2012 student loans, their tax thresholds have been frozen, like everyone else's tax thresholds. The thresholds at which they start repaying their loans have also been frozen at a rate which is below the median wage. And what you're essentially doing is, because it's a behind-the-scenes sleight of hand, we can probably get away with this. We couldn't get away with an increase in income tax. They're putting an additional tax burden on people at their most the moment where they have sort of the most potential and also the most need to invest in their futures. And we've done it all. I mean, a graduate now dragged into the higher tax bracket, which is basically, I don't know, like mid-level teacher, is paying a marginal tax rate of 57% if you factor in student loan repayments. And people don't think of student loan repayments as a tax, but they basically function as a tax. And we've kind of done that without having a national conversation about, hang on, do we want the tax burden to be that high at people at the exact point in their life when they might be starting a business or taking a risk to go get a more productive job or investing in their future in other ways? And then we go, wait, why are young people leaving the UK? Which has been another theme of the last week.
And are any of these plans from this government, from the last government, are they connecting on an emotional level at all? Because what you're describing sounds more like a malaise that overrides that.
I think it's difficult to get the overarching emotional connective narrative from this government. I think the child poverty stuff they've done this week and the two-child benefit cap, I mean, that's a core Labour value of trying to lift hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty. And I think that is very much to be applauded. But if you look at some of the messaging that's coming out, growth is our number one mission, but at the same time, we're not prepared to make any of the decisions around investment or around education that would enable that growth to happen. And we've got this other top priority, which is immigration, which, as John's essay really outlines, very much works against the growth agenda. It's just bits and pieces, and it all seems very muddled. And they've got one good news story to sell to their base on child poverty, which I think is a good thing, but they don't have the here is our step-by-step, point-by-point plan of how to get Britain's economy working again. And I think voters have noticed that. Like, if you sit in on focus groups, one of the things they say is that they just don't see what the plan is, what the narrative is. So that lack of a vision is definitely filtering through, even if voters might like the individual policies.
Is that disconnect from a surfeit of too many plans?
Yeah, I think partly it's every department kind of doing its own thing. I think also it's there not being a clear diagnosis of the problem. So our editor of the New Statesman did a big sit-down interview with Keir Starmer a couple of months ago. He did a number of sort of marking his first year in office, a number of interviews. And all of those profiles really tried to get to the heart of, like, what does Keir Starmer think the underlying problem is? And the sense you get from reading that is that he doesn't think that there is an underlying problem. He thinks that there are lots and lots of things that could be improved and fixed and could work better. But does he think something has fundamentally gone wrong with the British economy? It seems not. And therefore, does he have a sort of Thatcherite or a Blairite or even a sort of, Wilson government ideological, this is what has gone wrong, here's what the government is going to do to step in and fix it? No, because he doesn't recognise the depth of the problem.
Now it's time for But Your Emails, open to all listeners to the show, not just Patreon backers. This week we have not one but two questions. Mick Cahill in Australia asks, the complete failure of Starmer to translate Labour's massive majority into meaningful legislation is breathtaking. But is there a tiny chance that he could use this parliamentary dominance to make meaningful change by proposing electoral reform? Since it now looks like Reform UK could have an advantage on first past the post, is this the time for Labour to use their majority to push for proportional representation? Rachel.
Is this the time? Sure. Are they going to do it? Almost certainly not. I mean, we did a whole Oh God, What Now special on electoral reform and proportional representation. And if you want to go and find out why the French do it right and we should learn from them, it'll never catch on. Go listen to that. I think I've been saying for some time that we are now. Lots of people have been saying we are now in an effectively a 5 or 6 party reality working with a 2-party system, and very strange things are starting to happen.
Which is very much like India, actually, funnily enough, which uses a very similar system. John, electoral reform.
I mean, it seems to me that it's more likely after an election than before, in the sense that, if we have got this 5-party grouping with kind of 3, a left and a right bloc, then, you could imagine that if you end up with a minority government or a coalition government, then the price of other parties holding it in power would be, okay, well, you've got to change the electoral system. Whereas before, it's always the turkeys voting for Christmas problem that, if Keir Starmer said, right, let's have electoral reform, then lots of his backbenchers are going to lose their seats and they're going to revolt against him.
Yeah. I mean, lots of his backbenchers are going to lose their seats anyway.
No, as a lifelong supporter of electoral reform, I completely agree that the politics of it are such that it's only going to happen at the beginning of a parliament. It's partly the turkeys for Christmas problem, which is that by definition, you are telling a certain percentage of your MPs they're going to be out of a job if they vote for electoral reform. They're going to lose their seats. And you can do that, frankly, at the start of a 4 or 5 year parliament and say, look, this is the deal. You get 5 years in this parliament and you can sort out your careers for after that. But people who are looking at an election 9 months away aren't particularly likely to vote for electoral reform. And this, unfortunately, is the problem we've had. The other thing that I would maybe slightly disagree on is coalition talks, hung parliament, that kind of thing. I think that's a really bad way of getting a consensus around it, because then it becomes something like the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, which we say, it's a major change to the Constitution, which is actually really easily undone. And it becomes something that's vilified by a subsequent government that says, well, we need to go back to certainty and stability, rather like they've done in Italy, where they've rolled back on proportional representation. But I'm not optimistic, sadly, although I agree it should be done.
Actually, the conversations are happening. The conversations are happening among MPs. They're happening among Labour MPs. Obviously, the Lib Dems are big proponents of this. You've got Zach Polansky breathing new fire into the Greens, regardless of what you think about that, putting it on the table. And some of the comments of Richard Tice, who was a huge proponent of electoral reform prior to becoming an MP and has cooled down on it slightly. But it's not hard to find his view on the first past the post is sort of deeply undemocratic. So you are starting to have this fringe party, I'm not calling the Lib Dems a fringe party, but sort of consensus that it's not necessarily a left-right issue. And even Labour MPs are talking about it. It's the Conservatives who are really, really anti it, which is interesting because the Conservatives would actually have got more seats under a proportional system.
It's probably just the historian in me that's a cynic, but I can remember not only the Blair government but the Brown government, and it was sort of put on the back burner, and they said, well, we might get around to electoral reform. We'll get a Royal Commission on it. The Royal Commission does propose something, and then it's, yes, after the next election we might implement this. And eventually it becomes a series of breakfast meetings in Downing Street of this is our insurance for if we don't get re-elected in 2010. And it's very low priority. This is the problem with any sort of political reform. It's not actually getting agreement. It's getting it to be a priority. It's getting it to be in the top 5 rather than number 105 on the list of manifesto commitments. We do have another question, which is rather more concentrated. This is from an Adam Bolton, not necessarily the Adam Bolton, although I'm sure that he would argue that he is the Adam Bolton. Sorry, Adam. A question for Rachel about Kemi and Terry Pratchett.
I love this. Thank you, Adam.
Now, your New Statesman article has had a few weeks to percolate. Did anyone let you know what the Tory leader has learned from reading her favourite social satirist? Was it Boots economics, do the job that's put in front of you, or a hedgehog can't be buggered at all?
It was a wizard staff has a knob on the end. No, just for anyone who hasn't read this. So Kemi Badenoch mentioned during Conservative Party conference that Terry Pratchett was her favourite author. And I wrote a piece kind of going, has she actually read Terry Pratchett, given that there is a huge amount? I mean, it's about the left and progressivism and liberal values and supporting the poor and diversity and all of that. And it's not really very Kemi coded. So I wrote this piece, and actually I did get responses from a couple of Conservatives quite close to Kemi who very, very kindly, very politely said that I'd been reading Terry Pratchett wrong, and that actually their view was that apart from the last kind of 5 or 6 books where he does go very much into the diversity theme, they think, and I believe that Kemi thinks, that Terry Pratchett is right-wing coded because there's a lot there about the value of traditions. There's a lot there about being a little bit skeptical about authority figures who think they have all the answers. There's stuff about autonomy and agency and the importance of not writing people off because the state thinks that they're poor or not worth it. And I'd go, hang on, that's a left-wing coded value. And I think that's possibly one of the marvels of Terry Pratchett, that you can read it and you go, this guy's on my side, all the heroes are on my side, and you take out of it what you put in. So it made me think there's definitely stuff in there about community and tradition and a kind of Chestertonian respect for what was there before and for conserving, which is sort of part of what conservatism was meant to be about. Does it mirror what I see as today's Conservative Party? I can't see it, but they can. So thank you very much, Adam, for asking in.
It's been a while since I've heard G.K. Chesterton referenced on the show. I was saying, actually, just before the show, it reminded me a lot of some of the discussions I hear amongst politicos on Star Trek, because they all watch it, and they're all absolutely convinced that it backs up their ideology. The number of Labour, Lib Dem and Conservative people I know who all say, oh, absolutely, Star Trek, it's all about tradition, or it's all about utopianism. Even Conservative Republicans in the US I've spoken to have said, oh yeah, Star Trek, very much something that pushes a MAGA message.
I think it's fascinating. And I think the other thing you've got to remember with Star Trek and Terry Pratchett, basically everyone in politics, we're all massive nerds. So the fact that we have similar cultural references possibly isn't that much of a surprise.
John, you've written extensively about the issues facing Britain's economy, and now you've published this plan with Andrew Sissons. It's called Getting Out of the Hole, and in fact, there's a whole website dedicated to it, which is Getting Out of the Hole with dashes in between .uk. I'd love it if we could dig a little deeper into some of the proposals.
Yeah, I want to start with the importance of preparing Britain's position in Europe's manufacturing base, because what comes across in this essay is it's all about supply chains, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, so yes, it's all about supply chains, and that's why Britain's manufacturing performance has been pretty bad since Brexit. I mean, particularly in the car industry, but also its trade performance in goods has been awful, both on the exports and the import side. And that's because the way that the European manufacturing base is set up is lots of components for finished goods crisscross different countries. So if you raise trade barriers with your neighbour, then you make it much more difficult to be part of that kind of shared factory floor, which crosses so many countries in Europe. And so both your imports and your exports do very poorly. And we've seen that really happen quite badly. And as I said before, the real problem for this is that manufacturing is something where smaller cities and towns do a lot more of it because land's a bit cheaper. And it's a bit easier to get hold of the workers if you're attached to a sort of smaller town or city than if you're right in the countryside. So a really big, important anchor for their economies has been doing badly.
It kind of sounds like you're saying that the Brexit vote that was sold as a way to revitalise parts of the country that had seen their manufacturing industries fading and to sort of rebalance the UK because of the dominance of London and sort of help those places. It's done the exact opposite. That's kind of what I read into that.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And you can sort of understand, it's kind of intuitive that, oh, well, because we're part of this big continental market and like Germany and, Poland and Hungary have had this sort of big manufacturing improvement, particularly since the Central and Eastern European countries joined, then that's kind of taking away our manufacturing. And to a certain extent, that's true. But it's also true that because supply chains crisscross and there's this manufacturing base which crosses the entire continent, that if you leave it, then you just become much less competitive, and big global companies aren't going to come and use you as a base for manufacturing, and that's what we've seen has happened.
So what does a reinvigorated manufacturing base look like, especially because, the reality is that there are other countries that make things that we want cheaper than we do. What does playing to our strengths in manufacturing look like?
Well, I mean, uh, that's absolutely true, and we have some real strengths in sort of really advanced stuff, where the fact that we've got trade barriers isn't with Europe isn't such a huge deal, like in aerospace and so forth. Just because price, it doesn't matter so much about price with those things. It's really all about quality, and if you're a monopoly supplier of something like aircraft wings, for example, then that's fine. But for the other parts of it, like food manufacturing or chemicals or these other things where it really is important to be competitive. And these, in some ways, these are quite advanced factories that are doing this. Then you really have to try and get the trade barriers that you've imposed upon yourself through Brexit down. And the only real way to do that is to rejoin the single market for goods, which I think the EU would accept, as long as the UK accepted free movement and financial contributions. And so that's the the kind of the source of the trap. But I think really a reinvigoration of manufacturing, aside from the really super advanced stuff, is only going to really happen if the UK rejoins at least that part of the single market.
Well, you mentioned there the EU demanding the free movement of people. There's also a whole section or several sections in the essay about immigration and the need to rethink our immigration policy, both in terms of manufacturing and more broadly, which I don't think, I don't know if officials at the Home Office have read it. I get the impression that this didn't go top of the we're going to put this in Shabana Mahmood's inbox
No.
to-do list.
I think you're probably right. I mean, the really big problem I think with Labour's immigration strategy. I mean, you can argue with it politically, however you want, but it's making policy with while looking in the rearview mirror. And the net migration stats this week showed a huge drop in net migration. It didn't really make the front pages because it's less interesting than when it goes up a lot. But it fell from over 600,000 to around 200,000 people. And since like really the late 90s, the UK has had between 200 and 300,000 people net migration a year. And it's been something which has been a real benefit to the UK economy, because it's helped with the fact that we're aging, it's helped with the tax system, and it's provided a lot of both high-skilled and low-skilled workers that can provide us with the services that we need. And the government is busy with the white paper and the new restrictions that they're going to put in, which are really quite tough. It's going to be very hard to get a work visa if you don't have a degree. You're going to have to earn a lot of money, much more than most people in their 20s and 30s do, and they're the people that usually migrate. So I think it's highly likely that net migration is going to fall further. And one interesting estimate, which it's always a real guesstimate forecasting this kind of thing, but James Bowes for UK and a Changing Europe thinks it might fall even as low as the tens of thousands, i.e. David Cameron's pledge in the 2010s. And I think that would be extremely bad for the UK economy if it fell that low.
It's to sort of be careful what you wish for, isn't it, Seth?
Yeah, and I mean, how do we square the fact that the public appetite, and I'm generalizing broadly here, but the public sense is completely at odds with the evidence here. If you look at what is the single most popular option in migration, it's to limit immigration, it's to limit skilled immigration, it's to limit unskilled immigration, it's for it to just generally be seen as a bad thing. And if you look at it from an economics point of view, it's actually a good thing at pretty much every level we can talk about. How do we tackle that disparity?
It's really difficult to tackle. I mean, one of the interesting things about the polling is also that if you ask people about immigrants coming to do particular jobs, then majorities, or at least pluralities, are in favour of people coming into those jobs for everything except bankers. So the public opinion is a bit more nuanced on this. Mm-hmm. And I think it's affected by whether they have a sense of the government being in control. And we saw, it was very interesting after the Brexit vote in 2016 that importance of immigration in the kind of salience trackers of opinion polling fell massively because because everyone was distracted by other things, and B, people were like, okay, well, this is going to be sorted now, and then after the big surge in net migration after the pandemic, then it blows up again. But in the future, I think we're going to see net migration fall very rapidly, and so I wonder if the politics of this is going to drift away, but the kind of lingering growth effects and what it means for Rachel Reeves's budgets going into the next election, that's another story.
I was very interested in what you had to say when you wrote, when economies don't grow, politics becomes a zero-sum fight over distribution, with immigrants, poor people and other minorities becoming scapegoats for political failure. It will take luck and a good deal of political courage to turn the country around, but without action, things could easily get worse. Does it feel like we've nothing to lose here? I don't know. Where are we on that?
I was thinking about that in the context of Labour. And Rachel at the beginning of the show set it out very well that this is really a government of tinkering and doing what they feel they can and guarding a lot of their political capital. And I would just point out that they're down in the sort of 20% range for in the opinion poll, so it doesn't seem as though this is working. And I think broadly, opinion polls show that a lot of people think that Britain is in a bad place, that its economy is not working for them. They're sick of there not being significant real wage increases. They haven't had a pay rise for getting on for 2 decades now, really. And so a government which is bolder, which has a clear strategy, which can set out convincing arguments about what they need to do in order to be able to get growth going, even if that's going to impose some costs on people and it's going to be a bit more difficult in the short run, then it's possible to build a coalition for that. But I think the problem is that the government hasn't really tried, and so inevitably it's not really succeeding.
I'm going to give you the opposite perspective here, and this is not on you to solve, John, at all. But when I looked at some of your policy prescriptions, so like accepting and encouraging more immigration, particularly high-skilled immigration, rejoining the single market for goods and accepting the terms that come with that, championing industries like universities, reforming the tax system. I think there is consensus for simplifying the tax system. It's just every time anyone tries to do it, the people who are disadvantaged by it tend to be very loud. But I sort of looked at those and just went, I cannot see any government of any political makeup ever daring to touch, like maybe they might touch one of those things a little bit. But what you're saying, it makes total sense from an economics point of view. Politically, you've written something that I think in the current political climate is pretty toxic. And I cannot see where the coalition to do this from our current political makeup would come. Obviously, that's not your problem to solve, but I wondered if you could be a bit more optimistic.
Well, so I would just go back to the point about Thatcher, I guess. And you can completely disagree with what she did, but she had a clear strategy and she followed through on it, with backtracking when things weren't working and going more slowly when she got a lot of resistance. But that was that was the strategy, and she stuck to it. And to a certain extent, I think that's true of Cameron and Osborne. Again, you might disagree with it, but they were very clear after the global financial crisis and before they got elected that what they were going to do was austerity, and that was the guiding principle of the government, and that's what they did. And in the 2015 general election, they said they were going to do it some more. So it is possible to build a coalition for quite seismic change, and both the Thatcher and the Osborne and Cameron governments were big seismic changes. The question, I guess, is they both came after major crises or very difficult decades. So in the 70s, there was the bailout from the IMF and all of the problems with industrial strife. and then the global financial crisis for Osborne and Cameron. And so, the sort of the pessimistic to optimistic view is, perhaps it's going to take another crisis really to get these sort of big reforms that the economy really needs in order to be able to get productivity and growth to rise. Which is, it's a pessimistic view. And I would much prefer it if we could put together the coalition when things are relatively stable, but that might be what happens.
I mean, in support of Rachel's slightly pessimistic tone, just on an anecdotal level, I was research assistant on Will Hutton's last book, and when he started it, it was going to be called How to Remake Britain. And the advice I gave to him, and this is very difficult to give advice to one of the best-selling economists of all time, was that actually history is replete with these fantastic plans, including Keynes, for that matter, which never get implemented and which governments allow to sit on the shelf and fester. And so the book ended up being changed quite a bit to being called This Time No Mistakes, How to Remake Britain, because actually the first half of it was the history of how we keep having plans to turn the economy around and then things don't quite work out that way. So I suppose my question to you is how to stop, something that I think is a very cogent manifesto, how to stop that from just being of purely academic interest that's overlooked as not feasible.
Yeah. I mean, so I think, the government strategy, I think, was quite well set out before he became an MP and then a minister by Torsten Bell, which was, essentially we need to have several terms, in order to do things bit by bit and use our political capital bit by bit to change Britain. It doesn't look like that's going to work out from where the opinion polls are now. I mean, who knows what they'll look like in 2029? They might do. But if we take that as the strategy, then it does mean biting the bullet on some major things in each parliament. And the really big things, there has been some bullet biting in the sense of planning reform. There has been a rise in investment, although I think a probably too large a share of it has been spent on health and education and not on regeneration and transport. But there are all sorts of other issues which are essentially just being kind of pushed to one side. And so the question, I guess, for the government is, if your strategy is to have several terms, but it's looking like you're not going to get another term, then maybe you need to speed things up a little bit.
On tax, you say that we should reform the tax system so that it does less to inhibit work, mobility and investment. What would that look like?
I think there are sort of four main elements. So one is trying as far as possible to get rid of national insurance because it's a bad tax, right? I mean, we saw with the national insurance contributions rise that Rachel Reeves did in her last budget on employers, that the incidence of that tax is really on workers, despite her claiming that it didn't break her manifesto commitment not to raise workers' taxes. And we've seen some problems in the labour market as a result of that. And so income tax and national insurance basically do the same thing. So the ideal thing really would be to eliminate national insurance and just load it all onto income tax. I mean, the problem with that, obviously, is that it's incredibly politically difficult. And the Treasury thought about cutting national insurance a little bit and raising income tax a little bit before this budget, and then decided against it. But that would certainly make the income taxation system much more efficient. The second thing is trying to make VAT much more comprehensive, which is also really difficult because it means that lots of exempted stuff, particularly things like supermarket food and energy and so forth, would have quite big rises in VAT. But what you can do is get rid of the exemptions that make absolutely no sense, like the fact that there's no VAT on fatty and sugary ready meals, but there is VAT on takeaways when they're essentially the same thing.
I say that I taught my stepdaughters, they're 8, and I taught them about VAT loopholes with the Jaffa cake experiment, and we ate Jaffa cakes with a fork just to demonstrate that trying to use like, oh, it's a cake if you eat it with a fork, it's a biscuit if you don't, like how insane that was. So feel free to try that at home, parents listening to the show.
Yeah, that's an extremely good example. And like, the latest wheeze in the budget was what a good thing, I think, which is that they're going to include very sugary yogurt and milk drinks in the sugar tax, and that's an important principle of taxation, that things are basically the same should be taxed the same, or else you're giving an incentive for people to buy one thing and not the other, and that causes lots of inefficiency. And then the other final two things is just trying to get council tax so that it actually reflects value of housing, and if you do that, then that will really encourage the housing stock to be used more efficiently. So an older couple who live in a massive family home would in a very nice part of the country, but one that's also quite productive and there's lots of jobs, on retirement, perhaps they downsize and open that space up for a younger family who want to move into the area and get their job. And then the final one is capital gains tax, where capital gains are taxed at a much lower rate than income tax, and that encourages loads of people to disguise what is basically labour as capital gains. What you could do is just equalise those rates, but make sure that you retain incentives to invest by saying, look, if you buy an asset at this time and sell it at this time, you're only going to pay capital gains tax after the rate of inflation. So, if there's been loads of inflation and you've lost money, you won't be liable for tax. And that would raise loads of money, and it would make the whole, income tax system, including capital gains, much more efficient.
You talked in the third point about making council tax fairer, but I want to ask if council tax is a particularly effective tax either for assessing income or wealth.
No, it's not. But in a way, that's a kind of a feature, not a bug. I mean, it's rough, but it's a feature, not a bug, in the sense that, if you bought a house in 1993 in Hackney for very little money, and then it's gone up to become a $1 million+ house, then you essentially have just benefited from the fact that London has become loads more productive and there are loads more rich people who live there. And so it's kind of windfall gain, and there's not really a reason why you should retain all of that money.
But I mean, you've just talked about capital gains tax, and surely that's actually a far more accurate way of assessing that.
You could indeed impose capital gains tax on primary residences.
No one would ever move.
Politically bold,
that will be really difficult. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. But no, it's one of those great things of pass the parcel in public policy. I mean, I would suggest that council tax is no more accurate a way of assessment than, say, the old window tax from the 18th century, which would literally count the windows to say that's how wealthy you are, that's how much tax you'll pay.
Well, I mean, it is difficult with valuation, but you can update valuations over time, which we haven't done since 1991 or whenever, and at least then it's a bit more accurate. So, I mean, that was something that we recommended. Instead, they've gone for adding sort of essentially another type of housing tax on top of council tax, which is going to make the system more complicated.
I just think you can't do proper council tax reform without having an honest conversation with the public about what council taxes are spent on, because people look at their council tax bills and they look at the state of the roads, or the fact that the bin collection has gone fortnightly, and the fact that the council used to do a whole load of sort of free events for children or whatever and playgrounds, and it's not happening. And they go, where is this money going? And the answer is 3/4 of it is going on social care. And that is the consequence of successive Westminster governments refusing to properly get to grips with social care, and it's coming out in council tax. And I don't think most people understand that. I think they don't understand it because politicians don't want to talk about it. And I don't think you can get a consensus on fixing council tax without public understanding of how that money is spent, and probably a centralised government plan on social care.
And it is decades of centralisation by all parties, which understandably want to deliver on public policy, so they take stuff into the centre directly, except they do devolve to the councils all the things that they don't want to be legally responsible for, particularly things which you're likely to be sued for. So
yeah, and things where the liability or the demand for it is something that you don't have any control over, and so the councils are like, it's your legal duty to deal with these issues, but you're not going to get any extra money for doing so.
But on the sort of broader point, I wanted to ask John about the wider redistribution of wealth in the economy. I mean, how effective do you think we are as a tax system at doing that?
Not hugely effective, I don't think. I mean, I think the kind of the mantra on the left about having a specific wealth tax is not really the best way to tackle this. I think the mantra on the left about having a specific wealth tax is not the best way to do that, because we've already got wealth taxes, we've got capital gains tax and inheritance tax, and they do work. But they don't work particularly effectively, and that's true also of council tax, which is also essentially a wealth tax. So it's much better to try and make the overall wealth tax system work more effectively, to raise money, given the fact that we've had this huge increase in wealth inequality since the 1980s. And use the existing tax systems that we have and could work if they were designed properly to try and raise more money from people who, particularly in the housing sector, have basically just been gifted money because more productive and wealthy people have decided to move in around them.
And finally, I wanted to wrap up with a nice, easy, simple question, which is what can be done around infrastructure?
Build it. Build some.
Build it all. Well, so I mean, obviously there's huge congestion all over the place. Transport, water, energy. I mean, what we really focus on is energy and transport. And with energy, we're quite pro the government. They're being quite brave about not rowing back on net zero. And that's not only because we're big green types. It's also because the alternatives are obviously no better, and in pollution times, loads worse. We could either have loads more gas in the system, but the price of that has gone up hugely after Putin's invasion of Ukraine, or we could have lots more nuclear, the price of which has also gone up massively because interest rates have risen, and it's incredibly capital intensive. Even more capital intensive than renewables. So we don't really have any other choice than to carry on. But there are things that we can do better. And one of the recommendations that we make, the government did do, which is to remove the green levies on electricity bills. It's crazy to say, everybody, you need to electrify all that you do, transport and heating, and then say you're also going to have to pay much more for it than if you just use gas. And also the government can use its balance sheet to kind of spread out the costs a bit more. It can co-invest in new renewables and expand GB Energy, its vehicle, to do that, and to try and reduce the capital costs for expanding renewable power. And then the other main area that we look at is transport, and there the strategy has got to be to try and essentially expand cities by making transport within them much more efficient. And some of that will be roads, some of it will be trying to improve public transport. But that really has to be the priority, because then you create much more coherent economic units that are much more attractive to skilled people, which really are the people that big international companies want to employ. And then that helps to pull up the city around them.
Before we go, let's find out what escape routes have kept our panel from losing their minds over the ever-changing crazy world of politics and economics this week. Rachel, how have you been spending your spare time?
It's obviously Wicked. It's obviously Wicked. I went to see the second Wicked film the day that it came out. I went to see the first Wicked film the day that it came out. For context, I fell in love with the book when I was about 15. Yes, there is a book. Go read the book. If you feel like the musical makes no sense, go read the book. I've seen the musical at least 10 times. It is pure joy and pure love, and I will not hear a single word against it.
Hear, hear. And John, how about you?
I had a bit of a think about this, and I thought that something appropriate for a podcast that's called Oh God, What Now? Was to bring up human extinction.
Oh, lovely.
And
it's a very literal, very literal reading of Escape Route.
So there are two podcasts that I thought people might enjoy. One is Michael Hobbs and Peter Shamshiri in their podcast "If Books Could Kill," having a pop at the Israeli historian Yuval Noah Harari's book *Sapiens*. They're very mean but entertaining about it, and they call him the intellectual for the Davos set. A much better one is Past, Present, Future with David Runciman and Henry G, a paleontologist. It's absolutely fascinating. He's got a new book out called Decline and Fall of the Human Empire. It's all about, well, at least the last half is about human extinction, but it is absolutely fascinating.
And I love Christmas and Christmas decorations, although I'd be the first to admit that they can go up too early. I've bought my Christmas tree and I've taken my ornaments to one side, so I'll put them up on the night of the 30th. I mention this because there's always a special treat for me at this time of every year, which is it's really not Christmas until the gift shop of the Richard Nixon Presidential Library puts out their annual Nixon-themed ornament. And they haven't released one this year. I'm really distraught. Although the best one I have is actually something I got on Etsy, and it's that somebody made an ornament out of Nixon's resignation letter as president, Henry Kissinger, from 1974. It's great. It's the true spirit of Christmas for reasons that don't need explaining.
When are we getting our Oh God What Now Christmas ornaments?
I don't know.
I would 100% put an Oh God What Now Christmas ornament on my tree. I would love that.
Well, I'm game for that. But no, since I didn't have a Nixon one, I went out and got a Votes for Women one, which is a lovely big placard thing instead. But Christmas tree ornaments, good things.
Are all your ornaments political or historical in some way?
I've got one of Orson Welles shifting Paul Masson California champagne.
So that's a yes then.
No comment. And thanks to you for listening and to the supporters whose generosity keeps the podcast going. Don't forget our spectacular, definitely not Black Friday Patreon deal. You can get 20% off annual backing for Oh God What Now. We get extra stability into the new year, and you get the deep down satisfaction of keeping independent podcasting fighting fit for whatever 2026 throws at us. For more details, just search for Oh God What Now Patreon or follow this link in the show notes. We'll see you next time.